This tutorial is a beginner-friendly crash course which will take you through all the main steps of creating a usable prop or character in Masterpiece Studio Pro. The Masterpiece Studio Pro suite comes with two main apps. Creator is all about making the model itself, and Motion is about getting it to move. This workflow has the following main steps. Sculpt, where you make the model. Optimize, where you make sure that the model isn't too complex for the use case. Texture, where you paint on textures to the surface of the model to give it detail. Rig, where you add bones to the model which will define its joints and movable parts. Skin, where you attach the model to the bones which define its movement. And finally, Animate, where you give the model a few predetermined set of actions to follow. You can then export this creation to be imported into the software or game engine of your choice. Using Masterpiece Studio Pro, this workflow is extremely fast. This creation took me roughly 90 minutes to complete from scratch using tools that you can easily learn in this tutorial. Before you get started, it's helpful to have a concept to help you guide your process. This helps you avoid creative block and gives you a definitive end to projects so you can move on to the next one. For a simple character such as this one, it's probably overkill, but generally it's a good practice if you can manage it. We're in Masterpiece Creator now. Your left hand is the palette hand by default, and your right hand is the tool hand. This can be changed in the settings if you prefer. Creator is very powerful, and I recommend exploring everything here when you can, but I'll give you an overview of the main tools. The Clay tab lets you add clay anywhere within this box. It features several tools which lets you put down and shape the clay to your liking. This is where you will probably spend the majority of time in Creator. You can easily put down clay with the Add tool and remove it with the Erase tool. You can also choose to undo or redo an action and change the tool parameters here. These parameters change depending on the tool you are using, but most of them feature some sort of brush size and strength option, so adjust them to your need as you work. Depending on what controllers you are using, you can change these with the trackpad or thumbsticks on the fly. To help you in your sculpting, these are a few of the global settings you should look into. The mirror tool lets you create perfectly symmetrical models. The grid tool lets you snap your tool hand onto a virtual grid for accurate strokes and placement. And the Motion Smoother tool allows you to smooth down your hand's input and help you make smoother strokes. Traditionally, most 3D models are what are known as meshes. In contrast to meshes, clay is very easy to manipulate, but very impractical to use in any real use case. This means that once we are done creating our clay and are happy with how it looks, it must be converted to a mesh to lock in its features so we can texture it and eventually use it outside of Creator. For this workflow, all we have to do is click on the Texture tab and choose a conversion option. After waiting for it to convert, we can easily texture it and export the model to be used. Keep in mind that you should only do this once you finalize your clay. Going back to make changes after you convert it to a mesh is highly inefficient and not recommended. The last thing you should be familiar with is the scene graph. This shows you all the layers you have in your scene, and by default, you only have one clay layer, but you can add, remove, and alter them here. It is good practice to keep separate layers depending on your model's use case. Keeping separate layers of different elements lets you easily rig the model going forward as well. If a lot of this seems overwhelming, you'll stop feeling that way once you play around with these tools for a bit. Creator can be as simple as putting down a few blobs and exporting it from the export menu if you want to make a simple prop. But I'm going to be covering how to make this character using Creator and Motion, showing off the complete workflow. Step 1. Put down your clay. To start off, I'm making a symmetrical character, so obviously I'll want to enable the mirror feature. I temporarily enabled the grid as well so I can place some clay down for the head of the character. Adjusting the grid options lets me space the grid points closer together so I can work with smaller increments when I'm placing the neck down with the Add Line tool. From here, I'm putting down large blobs of rough clay which I will refine later. Note that my tool size changes as I need it to, because I'm using the shortcut on my tool hand to adjust it on the fly. This saves me tons of time in the process. The whole idea is to get the rough shape correct before stressing on any specific details. I'm also constantly using the VR interface to its fullest by constantly dragging and looking at the model from different angles. This gives me a good idea of where I have placed clay and where I need to put down more. Another benefit of sculpting in Creator is that it's never about getting it right the first time. You can liberally put down clay, look at it from different angles, and try again in a very short amount of time. I recommend not overthinking any specific details earlier in the process. It's a lot faster to try the idea and refine it rather than get it right the first time. The main clay tools I'm using are the Add tool with the sphere and cube shapes, the Add line tool for straight lines, the Erase tool, and my personal favorite in Creator, the Smooth tool, which helps even out a rough looking surface for a cleaner look. I also occasionally use the Shrink and Bulge tool to squeeze in or blow up parts of the model when I needed to. When you're refining your rough clay, don't forget about the strength slider. The Erase tool does what it promises, but with a lower strength setting, it is also a powerful way to make a finer adjustment rather than removing everything in the tool head. Note that I practically never turn off the mirror for most of this project, which means that I only have to do half the strokes to make the full model. When you're starting off, I recommend keeping your designs simple. It's tempting to want to make something ambitious, and I won't blame you if you do, but when you start modeling in VR and realize how easy it is, it's a lot of fun seeing your creations come to life so quickly. But keep in mind, the texturing process will take that much longer, and if you plan on making this a movable model, you'll also be adding time to your rigging process. To begin with, make something very simple, maybe even simpler than what I'm making here, and get a sense of how long your process will be. This is why I'm not making individual fingers on this character, or a face, for example. It took me 15 minutes to create the base humanoid that I'd like. It might take you 30 minutes or even more than an hour if you're an absolute beginner to 3D. That's no reason to feel bad though. Just rest assured that you'd still be doing it exponentially faster than a traditional 3D modeling workflow, and that the learning curve in this program is a lot easier as well. I want to add a backpack to this character. As I said, it's good practice to keep different elements as different layers. To do that, I go to the scene graph, labeled Scene in the tabs, and click on the Add Clay Layer button top right. This allows me to place another box which will contain our backpack clay. In my experience, it's also good practice to overlap layer positions when possible. You want to do this because if you accidentally move the layer too far, you will easily be able to reset its position and not have to tediously find the perfect spot for it again. Making sure that my new clay layer is selected, I put down clay as I usually do. If you'd like, you can change the clay color to help you differentiate between different pieces. A cool feature each of these clay tool heads has is that it allows you some customization over its shape. All I have to do is use my palette hand to click on this button on my tool hand, which lets me pull the arrows on the gizmo. It's pretty self-explanatory what this is doing. To make a flat, rectangular strap for the backpack, I pick the cube tool and pull it to the shape I want. When I'm happy with it, I use the trigger button to pick up the new tool head so I can start laying down clay in this shape. I'm also using the motion smoothing setting with a high degree of smoothing, which helps me put down a smooth, even trail of strap. It still takes me several tries, but undoing and trying again isn't that much work, and soon I have something I'm happy with. Moving on, I want to add hair to this character as well. Counterintuitively, I'm going to do this on another layer. I personally find that treating hair as a separate element makes things a lot easier. So I make a new clay layer and place it on top of my other ones. Like the backpack strap, I use a modified cube toolhead to make the individual locks of hair. I make good use of the smooth tool to give it a smooth, even look in the end. It makes perfect sense for a hiker to have a walking stick, so like the other times, I add a new clay layer on top of the other ones, then it's a simple stroke of an add line tool to make the stick. Admittedly, I should have been doing this as I went along, but it's never too late to start naming your layers, especially if you plan on using this model in other programs. I finished my clay modeling phase and now I'm ready to optimize it. Step 2. Optimize. Why optimize in the first place? In short, it's because resources are limited and you want it to be easy for computers to run your video game. Every 3D model is a collection of rectangles or triangles called faces or polygons or polys for short. The less of them there are, the less detail your model will be able to show, but the easier it will be to work with. It depends entirely on the use case, but a low poly model may have anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand polygons. A well-optimized model will have the fewest possible polygons while displaying all the detail it needs to. Talented artists will make clever use of textures, polygons, and rendering setups to get away with really low poly counts while keeping the model looking stunning. When it comes to video and animation, it's common to have millions of polygons. To get started with optimization, select your clay layer and navigate to the Texture tab. I know that this model is quite simple and it'll probably be fine if we pick Auto Prepare. In Auto Prepare, Creator will make some assumptions about the model and refine it as necessary. In a pinch, it's a useful feature, but let's explore the options we have if we want to manually prepare our mesh. Selecting Prepare Mesh will open this window, which you'll notice has a Simplified and Advanced tab. For this tutorial, we'll only be looking at the Simplified tab. You may never have to deal with the Advanced tab depending on what you need out of the software. Now it's a simple matter of selecting some options and dragging a slider around. Make sure that the texturing and animation checkboxes are enabled. I picked options which make the most sense for our use case. I'm seeing that the current polygon count is about 50,000 and that the target polygon count after this process will be about 3,000. That's a lot less than what we started with. Let's see how it looks. When I was making my clay, I chose not to make fine details like the face and individual fingers, because a lot of fine details like that just gets lost in a low poly mesh. Going from high poly to low poly is a term called decimation. It's a necessary but sometimes restricting step in the 3D modeling process. We've decimated our 50,000 polygons to just over 3,000 and, as we can see here, the model looks practically the same as it did before, which means that this is very well optimized. I have 3 other clay layers, and we have roughly the same level of detail in them as well. I go through the same process for all of them, selecting lower polygon counts wherever available. Now that we've optimized them, our clay layers are now mesh layers. This means that editing them is not as easy anymore, but it's close to getting finished. In the scene graph, every converted layer has a mesh layer taking precedence, which its original clay layer is nested under. The clay layers are only there as a backup and are ideally not used after refining. All that's left in Creator now is to texture our character. Step 3. Texture. Remember that processing our mesh also generated UV maps for it, which means that we can texture it. With the mesh layer selected, I can navigate to the texture menu. You'll notice that we have access to a few new tools. These are pretty self-explanatory. Paint lets you paint the selected texture onto our mesh. We won't cover stamps and stickers. Think of them as pre-made images or patches of texture to add to your model. It can be quite a time saver in some cases, but we have no need for them here. Fill paints the entire surface of the layer with the selected texture. Erase is the same as the paintbrush, but it removes textures. Selecting the material browser, I can pick from a robust list of pre-made high-quality materials to use with my model. You can definitely make your own textures, and there's a lot of customizability here, but that can be an entire tutorial of its own. For expedience, we'll just pick from what we have here. I'll pick this denim texture to paint some jeans on for our character. If I want, I can change the brush size and other parameters as I need to make sure I get it right. Note that the mirror tool works in this texture menu, which saves a lot of time on a symmetrical model. I picked this woolly looking texture for our character to paint a sweater on our model. I noticed that the backpack gets in the way and I can't paint the back, so I temporarily hide everything except the character in the scene graph. I go on to paint the shoes, making sure to get the bottoms as well. This might be confusing to you if you are new to 3D, but it's a good practice to paint everything. Our neutral cream colored character already has that skin tone, but I still picked a material to cover the exposed skin with. It's mostly a precaution, but this step just makes sure that every program you work with plays well with your model, as some of them expect texture data on every surface of your model and might cause problems without it. We're done painting our character's body. Now it's time to paint the backpack, the hair, and the stick. These are pretty homogeneously textured things, and this is where you'll be thanking yourself for making them separate layers. All we have to do is select the mesh using either the scene graph or by directly selecting the mesh with our select button. Then, using the fill tool with the right texture, it takes just one click to get it looking great. I used a fur texture for the hair, a wood texture for the stick, and a leather texture for the backpack. And here we have it. We modeled, optimized, and textured this character in just over 30 minutes. Remember to save often. The next step will be exporting this to Masterpiece Motion, adding movable bones and attaching the model to the bones to get it to move. To export to Motion, we'll have to go to the Home menu, click Private Export if you have that option, give it a name and select FBX as your file type. FBX is a very common and versatile file format for video games and animation 3D work. By default, Masterpiece Creator will export this to its Exports folder, found under Documents, Masterpiece Creator, Exports, and then your file name. Step 4. Importing and rigging. We're done with Masterpiece Creator, and now we are in Masterpiece Motion. This software does not create any new models, it simply sets it up to move it the way you want it to. It comes with a few pre-made models to work on, but the expectation is that you will be making or finding models to import into it. To get started, use the import menu and navigate to the destination of your FBX. Like in Creator, Motion has a palette and a tool hand as well. The Motion palette features some menus, global settings, and tool tabs as well. Rig means adding bones, and the main tool you need to know about is Draw Rig. This lets you place bones which you can attach to the mesh later. The process of attaching bones to mesh is called skinning, and that's what this menu is for. Once you are done placing your bones, you can select each bone and define what parts of the mesh to follow it around. The blend shape tools are, for our purposes, entirely optional, but I'll be using them in this tutorial anyway because it's a relatively simple concept with powerful possibilities that you might want to use. Once you have completed adding bones and skinning your mesh, you are ready to animate your work. To clarify, while we do call it Animate, Motion does not yet support creating a full scene to be exported into a viewable video. Animate in this case means giving the model a few predefined actions to do and carry out in the program of your choice, for example, a game engine. Motion has a few global settings as well. The ones you need to know about are the quick save, the view options, and the reset pose button. View options lets you see different elements of your creation such as the bones, vertices, and the mesh itself. Like Creator, Motion also has many tools and options that you might want to experiment with. For example, the entire rigging and skinning process could be as simple as hitting the auto skin or auto rig button. While a huge time saver in many cases, it's not always perfect, and the purpose of this tutorial is to introduce you to a guaranteed workflow. Feel free to experiment with these options if you like though. To begin with, let's add our bones in the rigging tools. The general rule of adding bones is to add them based on where you expect a joint to move. It's not that different from how our human skeleton works, but it's a lot simpler. Most of your character's bones will be linked to each other. Add one by holding down the trigger from one end of your root bone to somewhere that you could reasonably expect the mesh to bend. I start with the rib cage, the neck, and the head. Keep in mind that while the industry term is actually bones, you will be adding bones to any model you want moving around, including inanimate objects. I may decide that I want the backpack to jiggle up and down as this character moves around, so I'll add a bone there as well. If you don't like a bone's length, you can drag its tip to shape and position it as you'd like. Motion has a mirror tool as well, but it works a bit differently from the one in Creator. Rather than working in real time, it's more so meant for copying over bones and the information from one side of the axis to the other. This will make a lot more sense later, but for now just know that we only need to add bones and skin one side of the symmetrical mesh. The other side will be mostly taken care of as a simple last step. Finally, one thing to know about bones is that you can place them as a point of articulation with other bones, but if you place one freely, you'll notice this thin green line pointing back at the root bone. This line means that the dependent bone will copy the same movement and rotation as the independent bone. You can change which bone the green line points to by using the advanced rigging tools. I use this feature to change the stick's independent bone to the character's hand bone. The implications of this will be clearer when we animate our character. Now that we've placed the bones for one half of the character, you could do the other half, but it's a lot more efficient in this workflow to finish skinning the side too, then copying over all the information to the other side to save you the trouble. Step 5. Skinning. By now we have our mesh and bones placed. Skinning means assigning parts of the mesh to each bone, so when the bone is moved, the mesh moves with it. To do this, you have to select the mesh that you want to work with. In this case, it's the lower leg bones and the character mesh. Most 3D programs think in vertices, as in the specific points which makes up the polygons. By using the view settings, I have the program show me the bones, vertices, and mesh so that I can see exactly what vertices I am assigning each bone to. This process is as simple as selecting the bits we want to correspond to each bone. A really cool feature of Motion is that you can drag the bones around in real time to see how well the skinning worked. If you don't like it, you can simply readjust it with the skinning tools at your disposal. Red areas mean a high degree of movement correspondence, yellow means partial, blue means minimal. Uncolored areas means that the bone you have selected does not have any influence over the uncolored area. You'll notice that the leg does not move as expected with the bone. This is because of incorrect skinning. As you see, the top leg bone still has red skinning attached to the lower parts of the leg. To fix this, all we have to do is use the subtract tool and remove that skinning from the lower parts of the leg, leaving it only in charge of the thigh area. And just like that, it snaps into place. Now I'll repeat the same rigging and skinning process with the arm, stick, and backpack. Here comes the fun part. We've already done all the hard work with creating bones and skinning them on one side. Duplicating it to the other side is as simple as going to the mirror tool found under the rig menu and positioning the mirror slightly towards the unrigged side. Click on a base bone on the rigged side and watch it and all its child bones get replicated to the other side. From this point, it needs very minor adjustments, and after that, we have a perfectly good set of bones for the arms and legs. The next step is the same idea but for skinning. Currently, this side of the character has no skinning information. I'll use the View Incomplete Skinning option to show this. You'll see that the red parts aren't attached to any bones. Under the Skin menu, use the Bone to Bone tool with the Include Children box checked. Drag from the new, unrigged base bone to the one you copied it from. Just like that, all the skinning information gets copied over and we have a perfectly articulated arm on this side as well. Note that the bones don't necessarily care what layer or mesh they get attached to. The same bone can control your character's shoulders as well as the backpack straps, which makes sense in many ways. I spend the next few minutes rigging the hair, the stick, and the backpack to the bones I've created for them. I move the bones around a lot to see what parts I may have missed, or simply don't move the way that I expect them to, and readjust the skinning there as necessary. It's been 1 hour since we started with a blank canvas in Creator, and we already have this fully rigged character. The last step left is to add some animations. Step 6. Animate. As previously mentioned, animating in Motion currently means giving the character predetermined sets of movements. It's not animation in the sense that you will be exporting a video from this tool. These animations can be used in your game engine. Some common animations you might want to make for your game are a walk cycle, a jump, an idle standing pose, and some sort of interaction, such as reaching out to grab something. For this tutorial, I'll just make the character do a simple wave animation. Animating characters is ideally done by motion capture, which captures a level of detail that is hard to replicate in any other way. The downside to that is that it can easily get quite complicated and requires expensive equipment. But the next best thing is posing the character in VR, and luckily we already have everything we need. I'll quickly cover Blendshapes first though. To simplify, Blendshapes are a way for you to move small details on a character's mesh without any bones. There are some use cases for this. Let's say that your game has a mechanic where your character is lost in the woods, and their hair grows over time to reflect that. Well, you can make a blend shape to make this possible. Just add a new blend shape, select the morph tool and the helpful mirror option, then click edit next to the new blend shape. I used the tool to drag down the hair to make it look longer, and once we are finished, we can deselect edit to finalize our blend shape. Dragging the 0 left to right will cycle between all the steps of the blend shapes. At 0, the character has their short hair. Going up to 100, it gets longer. A common application of blend shapes is animating facial expressions, but that doesn't really apply to our character right now. That's blend shapes in a nutshell. It's optional but powerful if used right. Moving on to the Animate section, you'll notice that the timeline will appear up here, as well as the new menu on your palette hand. As I've already mentioned, animations in Masterpiece Motion aren't going to be exported to a video to be viewed. Rather, they are a pre-baked set of actions for your model to do when you call on those actions in the game engine or animation software of your choice. For example, if this hiker character comes across someone else in your video game, that might be when you want to make them do the wave animation, which we will be making here. Here, you'll notice that we have an animation tab and a poses tab. Poses are essentially keyframes within an animation, and an animation is one of those sets of actions I talked about. The animation is laid out on the timeline here. The first pose, or keyframe, is laid out here at the 0th frame, and the second pose is laid out here on the 24th frame. To make a new animation, I like to delete the second pose and set the first one to a relaxed default standing pose. When I'm done, I can hit New Pose and it will duplicate the selected pose one frame in front of the original one. I can bring the second pose all the way to the end of the animation. When I add a new pose and give it a unique movement and hit play, you'll notice that motion strings the poses together into an animation. It can be quite straightforward like this. The challenge in this particular character is that this is a humanoid, and we as humans can really spot uncanny movements when we see one. The end product of this short tutorial won't be the best wave animation you'll ever see, but given the few minutes it takes, it's a really good return on investment when it comes to a game jam or a rush project. Obviously, the more time you spend refining it, and the more references you look at, the better your results will be. Right now, I'm just going through the process of adding more frames and trying to incorporate more movement in the bones to sell the idea of this character waving. After a few minutes of adding and changing poses, I'm ready to call this animation done. It's time to export this model by going to the home menu, clicking export and naming it something suitable. Make sure it's an FBX and don't worry about any other options for now. Step 7. Importing into Unity. The FBX file we exported can be used in practically any 3D app. You could even import it into a slicer app and 3D print it if you desire. This is just an example of how you could use this asset if you were making a game in Unity. Open a new or existing Unity project as you usually would. As you can see at the bottom, there's a whole area which stores your assets. You will want to import your FBX to Unity so that it shows up here. You can drag and drop it in here, or you can click on Assets, Import Asset, and navigate to where your FBX file is. Note where all the texture image files are as well. You'll notice that something new has popped up in our asset viewer. On the right, there are a lot of optional parameters we can cover. Take some time to explore these if you haven't. For example, if you have blend shapes as we do in our model, you should make sure that it imports those. Expanding our import package, you'll notice that all the elements we have are individually shown here. This is very helpful if you, for example, want your character to take their backpack off, or go bald, or throw their stick around. You'll also notice an animation in this package. This, of course, is the only animation we made. Clicking on it and expanding the animation preview pane, we can click play and see that it looks and plays just fine. You may have noticed that all our textures are missing though. This is no problem. All you have to do is drag the textures used in the FBX to the asset library, and Unity will automatically append them to anywhere they have been used. As soon as we do that, we have brought our character to Unity. And we only started working on this about 90 minutes ago. A lot of the assets you will be making can easily take less than half the time this project took. I did my best to keep the series as to the point and helpful as possible without being overwhelming. I hope this was a good introduction to the pipeline we offer. I highly recommend diving in and exploring both Creator and Motion and getting comfortable with them. There is so much to discover, and you may find processes which work better for you. Thank you for watching.